Red Willow Crossing, Wyoming Territory, May 1886. Shortly before 7 on Sunday morning, the east approach of the new toll bridge dropped into the Red Willow River. Deep wheel ruts from 2 loaded stone wagons crossed the soft new fill, and fist-sized pieces of limestone lay scattered beside the approach. After the first stone wagon passed, Eli Brandt, the broad, red-bearded bridge foreman, had pointed to a crack opening in the road. The fill settled. "Close it." Gideon Vale sent the second wagon across and then waved an empty supply wagon forward. The empty wagon was halfway over when the earth beneath the first trestle folded. Its teamster, Miles Rusk, a stocky man with a broad, sun-browned face and short black beard, jumped clear. One mule went to its knees in the shallows, and the other hung against the traces. Eli and the younger bridge hand, lanky Thomas Keene, cut the leather and pulled both animals onto the eastern pasture. No one died, but within minutes, 47 people were stranded on the east side. Most were ranch families headed to church. The road behind them had vanished at Alder Run. Among them were Dr. Amos Bell and Sarah Tully, whose labor had begun before dawn. The only high ground near the crossing was a narrowing rise above the old ferry landing. Water had begun cutting a second channel behind it. The bridge had been open for 23 days. The ferry it replaced had been closed for 23 days. Eliza Fenner heard the bridge fail from the back room of her house. It was one hard crack, then the long splintering complaint of green timber losing the ground beneath it. At 39, Eliza was sturdy rather than tall, with gray-green eyes and dark auburn hair twisted into a low bun. She pulled on her oilskin coat and looked at her son. Nathan was 13, narrow through the shoulders after a lean winter, with his father's gray eyes and Eliza's habit of listening before speaking. "Bridge," he said. Eliza laced her boots. "Get the red flag." They were outside before the church bell began ringing. The Red Willow ran brown with snowmelt and 3 days of warm rain, carrying branches and pieces of bank through the cottonwoods. Before daylight, Eliza had driven a measuring stake at the landing and cut 2 notches into it. The river now stood 6 inches above the first. As Nathan watched, it climbed over the second. It was still rising. By the time she reached the west landing, the bridge's east approach was gone. One deck section had twisted against a cottonwood. The toll house leaned toward the river. A painted board hung by one nail. Vale Bridge Company. Across the water, people stood on the rise above the old east landing. Some held children. Dr. Bell had tied a white cloth to a fence post. Beside him, Sarah Tully sat beneath a blanket, with both hands under her belly. The river was too loud for words to cross. The white cloth said enough. Mayor Horace Dobbins arrived without his hat. He was 59 and heavy-set, and the mud on his council chamber coat made him look less important than frightened. "Eliza, we need the ferry." She kept her eyes on the east bank. "You closed it, canceled my license, and accepted Vale's word without an inspection." Dobbins looked across at Sarah. "I know. Tell me what you need." Eliza turned toward the ferry house. The council had chained the doors, but the key remained in the clerk's office. Dobbins sent a runner for it. While they waited, Eliza walked the west bank with a shovel handle, testing the ground. "The old ramp is hollow underneath," she said. "We land 30 feet downstream." Warren Cole, the blacksmith, followed her gaze. He was 51, heavy through the chest, with a smoke-darkened face, iron-gray whiskers, and hands strong enough to bend hot horseshoes. "That puts us below the tower. Which is why I want 2 catch ropes on the gravel bar. Anchor each one to a living cottonwood and tie a light throwing line to its working end. Not a fence post, not a man's waist." Warren nodded. He had used the ferry for 17 years. He knew enough about the river to recognize who knew more. His lean, gray-bearded brother Matthew would command the catch crews. The key arrived. Nathan opened the doors. Inside, the 40-foot platform floated behind its timber boom. Its twin pontoons could carry 2 loaded farm wagons. Passenger weight was not the danger that morning. Current, debris, and panic were. The iron guide cable still stretched between the towers. Its traveler, 4 grooved wheels held between bolted retaining plates, remained captive on the cable and chained against the west stop. When the council closed the ferry, Dobbins had placed the portable pilot drum and 2 bridle ropes in Vail's toll shed. The clerk's inventory still named them as Eliza's property, and the custody order allowed their return in an emergency. She had protested the seizure, but she had neither a license to operate nor money for a territorial suit. Dobbins stared at the empty mounting bed. "I can invoke the emergency clause." In writing. The clerk laid a sheet of paper on a dry board and wrote as Dobbins dictated. The order ended Vail's custody and returned the gear to Eliza. Dobbins signed, then Warren and 2 witnesses signed beneath him. Only then did Eliza let them break Vail's lock. Men carried the pilot drum and bridles downhill. Warren freed the traveler from the west stop. Others brought dry planks, blankets, 2 logging ropes, and the lighter throwing lines. Nathan checked the red flag. Fear had made the town useful. Caleb Hart came down behind them. He was 43, broad-shouldered, with deep-set hazel eyes and gray in his dark hair. 3 weeks earlier, Vail had fired him for refusing to certify the east approach. At the hearing that closed Eliza's ferry, Caleb had also stayed silent, while Vail dismissed her as a grieving widow. It was not the first debt his fear had left unpaid. Caleb spun each traveler wheel by hand. They turned free. Check the west tower and the buried anchor crib with Warren. He accepted the order and went to work. Eliza and Nathan inspected the ferry together. Daniel Fenner had rebuilt the pontoons 9 years earlier. He had been tall and lean, with the same steady gray eyes Nathan carried. Eliza had replaced 2 deck beams after his death and every bridle rope the spring after that. She knew which boards complained under a boot and which merely sounded old. 4 years earlier, men had dragged Daniel's body from this same water. The town said Eliza had failed to set the landing pole. They said a freight wagon struck the platform, the ferry broke free, and Daniel drowned, correcting her mistake. Nathan had been 9. He had heard the story from boys who were too young to remember the day and old enough to enjoy the hurt it caused. He had never asked his mother whether it was true. Eliza had never made him ask. At the west tower, Warren exposed the buried anchor crib and found firm earth around it. Caleb tested the braces, traveler wheels, retaining plates, and west stop. "West side is sound," Warren called. Eliza looked at the east tower. Floodwater had not reached it, but the twisted bridge deck upstream was beginning to tear loose. If that wreckage struck the tower, the cable could drop. She pointed downstream. "Set both catch crews now. 6 men on each rope. Nathan, you stay with Matthew at the gravel bar." Nathan frowned. "I know the pilot wheel. I need you at the backup landing. Pa let me cross in spring water. Your father made choices I am not required to repeat." The words landed harder than she intended. Nathan looked toward the river. Eliza lowered her voice. "Matthew commands the crews. Keep the red flag high while the gravel bar is clear. Drop it if debris blocks the approach. A humming cable is information, not an order. Do not act because somebody panics." He met her eyes. "Red flag high if the bar is clear. Down if it is blocked." "Good." The traveler rolled on the guide cable above the river. Its 2 bridles ran to the ferry's bow and stern. The pilot wheel shortened one and lengthened the other, changing the platform's angle so the current carried it across. A small landing winch handled the last few yards of slack water. Each bridle had a steel release pin. One pin would turn the ferry lengthwise, while the other kept it attached. Both pins would set it free. Daniel had tested those pins every month. So had Eliza. Before they cast off, Caleb handed the clerk an oilcloth packet. Since Vail had fired him, he had spent 3 weeks recovering the names of the 6 survivors from Daniel's last crossing and forcing himself to write what he had once denied. He finished Friday. That Sunday, he meant to hand the packet to the clerk on the church steps after service, where witnesses could see it change hands. The bridge fell before the service began. Inside were his warning about the east fill, Vale's signed receipt, a copy of the freight ledger from Daniel's accident, and Caleb's statement. Eliza looked from the packet to Sarah across the river. "Keep it dry," she told the clerk. To Caleb, she said, "You tell me the rest when everyone is off that bank." At 8:12, the ferry left the west bank with Eliza at the pilot wheel, Warren beside the release pins, and Caleb watching the traveler. They carried no passengers. The first trip would test the rig and establish a safe east landing. The platform entered the current at an angle. The bridles tightened. The traveler began rolling east with a low iron murmur. A cottonwood limb came around the bend, half hidden beneath the surface. Eliza eased the wheel until the ferry's bow pointed closer upstream. Their sideways movement slowed. The limb passed ahead of them. Then she restored the angle, and the current pushed them east again. Caleb watched the water rather than her hands. "Daniel taught you that?" "Daniel taught me to watch what the river carries. The wheel I learned myself." They reached the east side 11 minutes after leaving. The old ramp was gone. Caleb and Warren secured a line to a cottonwood and used the dry planks carried on deck to make a narrow ramp to firm ground. Dr. Bell came down first, compact and quick-moving beneath a close iron-gray beard. He had given his hat to one of the children. "How many?" Eliza asked. 47, including Ruth Ellery's infant. I counted twice. Sarah is bleeding a little. Not enough to frighten me yet, but I want her inside and warm. She goes on the first load." Sarah Tully lay beneath a canvas shelter, wet brown hair against her face and both hands gripping the blanket over her pale green dress. Her husband, Jacob, a lean, sandy-haired ranch hand, knelt beside her. Eliza crouched. "We are taking you first." Sarah looked toward the children. "Them before me. They board first, so they can sit safely in the center. You come off first on the west bank." Another pain took Sarah. Her hand closed around Eliza's wrist. "That is a promise?" "Yes." Gideon Vale approached when the pain passed. He was 56, tall and spare, with a pale, narrow face, cold blue eyes, and a long black coat. Even in mud, he carried himself like a man accustomed to people mistaking ownership for authority. "Eli and Thomas should cross first. They can strengthen the west tower." It was not a foolish suggestion. That was how Vale made dangerous decisions sound reasonable. "The west tower has been inspected," Eliza said. "The doctor, Sarah, the children, and those who cannot stand in cold rain go first. This ferry was condemned. Closed on your word, not an inspection. The mayor's emergency order is in writing." Vale's eyes narrowed. "You came prepared for an argument. I came prepared for a river." She pointed to the higher ground. "Keep everyone above the willow line. You may organize them there. You do not give orders on the platform." He studied the ferry, the damaged bridge, and the shrinking bank behind him. Then he stepped back. The first passenger load left the east bank at 8:55 with 22 people. The 11 children boarded first and sat between the center rails. 6 elderly residents sat around them. 2 mothers braced at the center beam. Sarah lay on blankets near the westward end, with Jacob beside her and Dr. Bell at her feet. The ferry had carried more weight in sacks of grain. Eliza was not worried about buoyancy. She was worried about balance. "No one changes places," she said. "If you are afraid, hold the rail and remain afraid where you are." One child gave a nervous laugh. Then the current caught them. Halfway across, the guide cable began to hum. Nathan could hear it from the gravel bar, but he did not move. Eliza had told him sound was information, not an order. The hum deepened as a broken beam lodged against the east tower and changed the pull on the cable. Caleb checked the traveler. "Forward wheel is riding high." "I see it." Eliza eased the pilot wheel 2 spokes. The ferry's long axis came closer to the current. Pressure on the bridles fell. The traveler settled and the hum faded. Sarah cried out. The children went quiet. "Keep looking at me," Dr. Bell told her. Eliza restored the crossing angle only after the line ran clean. 12 minutes after leaving the east bank, the platform entered the slack water below the west tower. The landing crew drew it in with the small winch. Eliza stepped ashore and cleared the ramp. Sarah first. Dr. Bell and Jacob lifted her on the ferry house door they had prepared as a litter. The 6 older passengers followed. Then the children and their mothers came off together. Eliza had kept her promise. Women carried Sarah into the ferry house, where a stove was already burning. Dr. Bell followed with his sleeves rolled. It took 18 minutes to clear the children, elders, and Sarah's litter from the deck. Eliza, Warren, and Caleb then made the empty return and reached the temporary east ramp 12 minutes later. The second passenger load departed at 9:55 after 18 minutes of careful boarding with 15 people, a farmer with a broken ankle and his grown son, Ruth Ellery, and her infant, 7 people who were older, chilled, or exhausted, and 4 adult relatives needed to steady and carry them at the west landing. Ruth was 24 and small-framed, with a black braid beneath a gray hood and her baby held inside a cream blanket. Vale stopped at the rail. The first deck carried 22. "The river is higher and the debris is heavier," Eliza said. "I set this load at 15 and every place is spoken for. I can help on the west bank. 7 people here may not last another hour. 4 cannot step off without somebody holding them. You, Eli, Thomas, and 7 other able-bodied adults can wait. The 10 of you will draw for the 7 places on the third load. 3 must remain to keep this ramp usable until we return." Vale looked at Eli and Thomas. Mud covered both men to the knees. "My men stay," he said. "So do I." Eli wiped rain from his beard. "We will keep the ramp." Thomas nodded. The 7 others gathered their bundles for the next trip. Vale stepped away from the rail. For once, his decision cost him something. The second crossing took 13 minutes. The farmer was carried to the church. Ruth and her baby went to Eliza's house, out of the rain. Unloading the injured and weakened passengers took 17 minutes. The 3 operators returned east and reached the temporary ramp 12 minutes later. At 10:44, the third passenger load left with the 7 remaining able-bodied adults. Miles Rusk carried the cut mule traces looped over one shoulder. Eliza nodded toward them. "The team?" "Alive on the eastern pasture," Miles said. "Frightened and muddy." Eli and Thomas got both clear before the second channel opened. 13 minutes later, they reached the west bank. As Miles stepped onto the gravel, he caught Caleb by the sleeve. "I heard Eli tell Vale the east fill had settled under the first stone wagon. Vale sent the second across and then waved me on." Caleb took him directly to Mayor Dobbins and the clerk. The clerk wrote the account, read it back, and Miles signed while Dobbins witnessed. 44 of the 47 stranded people were now across. 3 remained: Gideon Vale, Eli Brandt, and Thomas Keene, who had stayed to keep the temporary approach usable. While the 7 passengers cleared the landing, the crew inspected both bridles. Warren found no broken strands. Caleb touched the traveler hubs. "Warm," he said, "not hot." Eliza looked upstream. The twisted section of bridge had torn loose from the cottonwood. It turned slowly in the main channel. A wide raft of beams and railing aimed toward the east tower. "It will reach the tower before another full round trip," Caleb said. "Then we do not waste this one." At 11:08, Eliza, Warren, and Caleb began the final eastbound return. Nathan stood on the gravel bar with the red flag held high. The downstream approach remained clear. Halfway over, a baby cried from the ferry house. The sound did not cross the whole river. Nathan heard it on the west bank and turned toward the door. A woman stepped outside and raised both hands. Sarah's child had been born during the ferry's final empty return. Nathan looked back to the ferry and lifted the red flag higher. 13 minutes after leaving, the operators reached the east side. The fresh channel behind the rise was knee-deep now. Vale, Eli, and Thomas were no longer standing on a bank. They were standing on the end of an island that was coming apart. Vale boarded only after Eli and Thomas were inside the center rails. "The bridge section will hit the tower," he said. "Yes. If we wait for it to pass, the cable may survive. The ground behind us will not." He looked at the new channel and did not argue. Eliza placed him beside the center beam. "When I tell you to get down, you get down. If somebody falls, you hold the rail before you hold him." Warren handles the release pins. Caleb watches the traveler. No one changes those jobs. Vale removed his gloves and wrapped both hands around the rail. The final westbound crossing began at 11:28. Eliza gave the ferry a steeper angle than before. The traveler rolled west. Water pressed against the pontoons, but the deck remained level. Behind them, the bridge wreckage struck the east tower. The first impact broke an outer brace. The guide cable sagged. "Down," Eliza said. Everyone crouched inside the center rails. Caleb kept his eyes on the traveler. The rear wheel is riding hard against the retaining plate. Eliza eased one spoke out of the angle. The wheel settled back into its groove. They lost a little westward speed, but the traveler ran true. The wreckage rolled and struck the tower again. The second brace split. The cable dropped several feet. The forward bridle went slack and then snapped tight hard enough to shake the deck. "Forward pin," Eliza said. Warren pulled it. The forward bridle released from its clevis. Held by the remaining aft bridle, the ferry pivoted until its long axis lay nearly parallel with the current, bow pointing downstream. The violent sideways pressure eased. They were no longer crossing cleanly toward the normal landing. They were sliding west and downstream toward the gravel bar, exactly where the catch crews waited. Vale stared at the loose bridle. "You planned to lose the landing. I planned to have another one." The east tower leaned over the river. The ferry was 40 yards from the west shallows when the tower fell. The guide cable struck the water behind them. The traveler jerked backward, and the remaining bridle dragged hard against the stern. Caleb looked at Eliza. "If that line catches under the platform..." Warren, aft pin. Warren pulled the second release. The ferry came free of the fallen cable. For the first time that morning, nothing tied them to either bank. The current carried the platform downstream until only 12 yards separated its rail from the gravel bar. Matthew's bow thrower raised the weighted end of a light line. Nathan dropped the red flag and pointed upstream of the ferry. A root ball was turning just beneath the surface, directly through the path where the line would fall. Matthew held the thrower back. The roots passed beneath the ferry's stern without catching. Nathan raised the flag. The thrower cast. Caleb caught the light line inside the rail, hauled the heavy bow rope aboard, and wrapped it twice around the forward bollard. The stern crew sent its throwing line across. Warren drew the second catch rope aboard and secured it. Both shore crews took in the slack against their cottonwood anchors. The platform entered the shallows lengthwise and grounded against the flooded edge of the bar. No one moved until Eliza stood. Off. Eli and Thomas went first and steadied the plank. Vale followed them without speaking. Caleb and Warren remained aboard until Eliza stepped onto the gravel. Nathan reached her before the others. He wrapped both arms around her. Eliza held him with one hand at the back of his head. "You saw the root," she said. "I nearly let him throw. You did not. You showed them where to look." The ferry house door opened. Dr. Bell stepped out with blood on his sleeves and a tired smile. "Sarah is safe," he called. "The baby is a girl, and she arrived while you were making the empty return with an opinion about everything." Relief moved through the landing, quieter than cheering and deeper. Eliza looked back at the river. The ferry sat crooked in the shallows. The released bridles trailed from the fallen cable. The east tower was gone, and the guide cable lay beneath the water. The crossing was damaged. It was not lost. Gideon Vale tried to speak before anyone could decide what the morning meant. "The flood took the approach," he said. "No bridge could have held that bank." Caleb faced him. "The river took the unprotected east fill I warned you about. Miles Rusk has just signed his account before the mayor and clerk. You sent a second loaded wagon across after Eli reported settlement. Then you waved Miles onto the approach." Vale's expression barely changed. "You signed the opening order. I signed the structural frame. I refused the approach. My written warning is with the clerk, carrying your signature and the time you received it." Mayor Dobbins came down the slope with the oilcloth packet in his hands. "So is the copy you gave the council," he said. "The one we chose not to read before the dedication." Vale looked from the mayor to the crowd. He did not confess. He did not apologize. He simply understood that the flood had left him without the silence he depended on. Eliza turned to Caleb. "Daniel." Nathan stiffened beside her. Caleb removed his hat. 4 years ago, Vale's freight wagon came down the south road carrying 12 barrels of machine oil and a cast iron press. The load was nearly twice the posted limit. Caleb looked toward the old gate. The driver was Reuben Sutter. He was thick-set, with a broken nose and a sandy beard. The freight ledger names him and the load. Eliza said nothing. Daniel kept the gate chain across the ramp. Reuben's brakes were failing. He drove through the chain before Daniel called him forward. The ferry was still settling against the landing blocks, and the pawl could not be dropped until the platform aligned. You were standing at the pawl lever, waiting for that alignment. Caleb's voice roughened. The wagon struck before the platform seated, and before you could set the pawl, Daniel pushed 6 passengers clear and pulled the forward bridle's release pin so the platform would turn with the current instead of crushing them against the pier. He was caught between the ramp and the rail when it broke away. He held Eliza's eyes. "You did not forget the pawl. You did not wave that wagon forward. Daniel did not die correcting you. He died choosing the only release that could save the people on that deck." Nathan looked at his mother. "You knew?" Eliza asked Caleb. "I saw it from the south road." "And you testified that you arrived afterward?" "Yes." "Why?" "My father owed Vale $600. Vale threatened to take the shop and the house. My father lived 2 more years. After he died, I still stayed quiet. By then, I was not protecting him. I was protecting myself from admitting what I had done." There was no excuse hidden inside the answer. "The freight ledger copy is in that packet," Caleb continued. "It proves the illegal load and names Reuben as the driver. My statement is only my word until the passengers answer for what they saw. I copied the ledger before Vale burned the original, and I finished the statement Friday." Nathan's voice was small. Then Pa knew what he was doing. Eliza looked at the 2 release handles hanging from the ferry. "Yes," she said, "he knew. And you did too." She took her son's wet face between her hands. "Today, I did." Nathan closed his eyes. For 4 years, the town's lie had forced him to choose between trusting his mother and believing nearly every adult around him. The truth did not erase those years. It gave them back to the right people. Caleb waited. Eliza released Nathan and faced him. "You will testify. You will give up every copy. You will not ask me to make your confession easier to carry." "I understand." "No," she said. "You are beginning to." By sundown, the clerk's desk was covered with damp statements. Dobbins suspended the bridge franchise and closed both approaches. 2 days later, a territorial road engineer arrived from Laramie. He found that the unprotected east fill had scoured away beneath the landward trestle and that the 2 stone wagons had hastened a collapse already underway. During the following week, the county prosecutor located 4 of the 6 surviving passengers named by Caleb. Their accounts independently matched his on the closed gate chain, the moving platform, Eliza waiting at the pawl lever, and Daniel pulling the release after he cleared the deck. With the engineer's report and Miles's signed account before it, The council revoked Vale's crossing privilege. The prosecutor opened inquiries into the falsified completion records, the destroyed freight ledger, and Caleb's claim of intimidation. Vale contested every action. Caleb testified under oath about Daniel and the bridge. He lost the contracts Vale still controlled and the trust of people who had believed his earlier statement. Eliza did not defend him from either consequence. The council offered to restore her old license. She placed a different proposal on the table. The ferry and its moving gear would remain hers. The town would own and pay to inspect the fixed cable, towers, and approaches. Regular fares would fund maintenance. Emergency crossings would be free. The operator, marshal, or mayor could close the ferry when danger was immediate, but a closure beyond 48 hours would require an independent inspection and a public written reason. Warren would qualify as relief operator. Nathan could apprentice, but he would not command a crossing until he was old enough and passed the same practical test as any adult. Dobbins read the page twice. "Who wrote this?" "I dictated the terms," Eliza said. Nathan put them in order and wrote the clean copy. For 3 crowded evening meetings, merchants argued over the cost, and Vale's remaining partners objected from the back benches. Eliza answered every question. When Dobbins read the final charter aloud, none of the safety clauses had moved. By late August, the ferry ran again. The new East Tower stood farther inland on stone footings. Warren had added a guard to each release pin and painted both handles red. A board inside the ferry house listed inspection dates, rope replacements, load limits, and the names of the 2 qualified operators. Caleb rebuilt the east ramp without wages. After the prosecutor sealed the evidence, he brought Eliza the clerk's certified copy of the freight ledger sheet. "Keeping the first copy did one decent thing," he said. "Keeping it secret did 4 years of harm." "I know." "Then remember both." She did not forgive him. When his wagon left Red Willow, she watched only long enough to see that he kept moving. One clear morning in September, Nathan stood at the pilot wheel while Eliza watched beside him. Warren remained within reach, the qualified operator responsible for the crossing. A farm wagon waited on the west bank. 2 school children sat beside their mother. A milk cow shifted behind them. Nathan angled the bow too far upstream. The ferry slowed. "What did I do?" he asked. "You tried to overpower the river." He eased the wheel back 1 spoke. The current caught the pontoons and carried them smoothly toward the east landing. Halfway across, the guide cable began its familiar low hum. Nathan looked at the traveler, then at the water, then back upstream. He did not reach for a release. He listened. Eliza let him make the next small correction himself. The ferry touched the east landing so gently that the milk cow barely lifted its head. It was an ordinary crossing. That was enough. If you were Eliza, would you have made that final crossing for Vale after he took her livelihood and helped bury the truth about Daniel, or would you have left him to face the river he ignored? Tell us in the comments and subscribe to Dusty Mercy for more full-length Western stories.